She was invisible the way most people are invisible in places like that. Moving quietly, doing her job, keeping her eyes down just enough to seem harmless. But Zara Webb had spent her whole life learning one thing that no one in that restaurant understood yet. That the most dangerous person in any room is never the one with the most power. It's the one paying the most attention. And on the night a red dot appeared on the chest of one of the most powerful men in the country. Everyone else was looking the wrong way. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The first thing Zara noticed when she walked into Meridian that evening wasn't the chandelier overhead, or the way the candlelight caught the crystal wine glasses, or even the murmur of money moving between men in expensive suits. It was the silence underneath all of it, the kind of silence that hid something. She had learned a long time ago that silence wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes silence was a door with a lock on the wrong side. Meridian was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise. It didn't need to. The chairs cost more than a month of a rent. The menu had no prices because if you had to ask, you weren't supposed to be there. Zara had been working the dinner shift for 8 months, and she still hadn't gotten used to the way some of the guests looked through her. Not past her, but through her, like she wasn't fully real. She tied her apron, checked her section, and picked up her order pad. Table 9 was the anchor tonight. For men, center room. The kind of table management put you on when they wanted everything perfect. She'd been assigned it specifically because her manager, Dale, trusted her to be quiet, efficient, and invisible. He meant it as a compliment. She took it as information. She crossed the floor with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to move without drawing attention. Light steps, eyes forward, expression neutral. A skill she hadn't learned in a hospitality training course. She'd learned it in the neighborhood she grew up in, where drawing attention was sometimes the difference between walking home and not walking home at all. Table 9 had already ordered drinks by the time she arrived to introduce herself. The man at the center of the group was the kind of person rooms organize themselves around without being asked. He was somewhere in his late 50s, silver-haired, broad in the shoulders, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been built on him personally. His name, according to the reservation, was Grant Calloway. She recognized the name. Most people would have, if they followed finance news, which she didn't particularly, but her younger brother Marcus did, and he had mentioned the name once during a dinner at home while scrolling through his phone. Calloway Industries. That man owns half the East Coast port infrastructure. She hadn't paid it much attention then. Now she was refilling his water glass. The other 3 men at the table were younger, deferential, the kind of men who laughed a half-second after the important man laughed. Except one, seated to Calloway's left, a man with narrow eyes and a way of holding his fork like he wasn't planning to use it, didn't seem interested in Calloway's conversation at all. He was scanning the room. She noticed that. She didn't react to it, but she noticed it. She took their orders, repeated them back perfectly without writing anything down, a habit that impressed guests and saved her steps, and moved toward the kitchen. On her way, she swept the room the way she always did. Not staring, just absorbing. A skill honed not by training, but by years of needing to know where everything was before something happened. The restaurant was about 2/3 full. Mostly couples, one large birthday table near the back, 2 solo diners at the bar, and a man seated alone by the east window. The east window faced the building across the street. She didn't stop walking, but something in her chest shifted the way it used to when she was 16 and cutting through the back of Clover Street. That low-frequency pull that said something is wrong and you need to pay attention. The man at the east window had ordered a drink 40 minutes ago and hadn't touched it. He was positioned at an angle that didn't make sense for someone enjoying a meal. His chair faced the room, but his eyes moved past it, outside, across, up. She kept moving, filed it away, put in the order at the kitchen window, and turned back around. The dinner service moved the way it always did at Meridian. Smooth, coordinated, almost silent. The staff communicated in glances and small movements. Plates arrived like they materialized from the air. Zara worked her section with the kind of focus that left no room for distraction. But her attention kept returning to table 9. Calloway was talking, something about projections, a Q4 adjustment, a deal that was apparently still being finalized. The 2 agreeable men were nodding. The narrow-eyed man to his left was still not eating. 40 minutes in, the man at the east window stood, said something to a passing waiter, and left through the side corridor toward the restrooms. He didn't come back. Zara was at the service station when she noticed the reflection. It was faint, a trick of the angle and the candlelight, but the front glass of the restaurant, which faced east, caught a small bright point for just a moment. Less than a second. A pinpoint of light that swept slightly before settling. She had seen that before. Not in person, on a screen. Her uncle, who had done 2 tours before he came home different, used to watch war documentaries late at night. She had sat with him sometimes, more for the company than the content. She remembered a moment in one of those films. A soldier pointing at a wall and saying, "There, you see that flicker? That's how you know." Her body moved before her mind caught up. She was across the room in 4 steps. Her tray went down on an empty table. She registered the red dot, then, clearly, unmistakably, tracking across the tablecloth toward the center of Grant Calloway's chest. She hit him from the left. Not a gentle redirect. A full, committed shove that took both of them off their chairs and onto the floor. The table lurched. Glasses shattered. The 2 agreeable men scrambled back. The narrow-eyed man was already on his feet, hand reaching inside his jacket. The window behind where Calloway had been sitting exploded inward. A single crack, sharp and clean, followed by a spray of glass across the empty chairs. The bullet hit the upholstered back wall of the booth, dead center, exactly where man's chest would have been if he'd still been sitting there. Then the screaming started. The room collapsed into chaos in the span of about 3 seconds. Chairs scraped back. Someone knocked over a wine rack. The birthday table near the back dissolved into panicked movement. 2 servers dropped their trays. The maitre d' was already on his radio. Zara was still on the floor with Calloway when the first security man reached them. She was aware of how this looked. She was a young black woman on top of a white billionaire who had just nearly been shot. She was already raising her hands before anyone told her to. I work here. I'm a server, They grabbed her by both arms and hauled her upright. Not gently. Get your hands off her. Calloway's voice from somewhere below. He was pushing himself up from the floor, adjusting his jacket, blood from a glass cut on his forearm dark against his white cuffs. She was, "Sir, we need to secure you first." The security man didn't look at Zara. He looked through her the same way the guest did. She was moved to the side, both arms still held, and guided, firmly, not asked, toward the staff corridor. There was a red, she said clearly, on his chest, from the east window. The man who was sitting there left about 4 minutes before the shot. Nobody responded to that. Not immediately. The security man to her right spoke into his earpiece. The one to her left kept moving her forward. She stopped resisting. She had learned that too. Resistance, in moments like this, was a tax she couldn't afford to pay. They put her in the manager's private office near the back of the kitchen and closed the door. Not locked, but she understood she wasn't supposed to open it. She sat down, folded her hands, and waited. Through the wall, she could hear the controlled scramble of security teams coordinating. She could hear glass being cleaned up. She could hear, faintly, the measured voice of Grant Calloway giving instructions to someone. Not shaken, already operational. She exhaled slowly and looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. They never did afterward. During was a different story. During, her whole body ran on something chemical and urgent. But after, she always went quiet inside. Her mother had called it strange. Her uncle had called it gift. She thought of Marcus at home, probably asleep already, textbooks spread across his bed, his phone charging on the floor because he always forgot to put it on the nightstand. He had a chemistry exam in 2 days. She had promised she'd quiz him tomorrow morning. She needed to get back to that. The door opened. The man who entered was not the restaurant manager. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, built like someone who had once been required to be that way and had never entirely stopped. His suit was good but not decorative. His eyes moved across the room before they settled on her. "My name is Garrett Shaw," he said. "I handle security from Mr. Calloway." "Okay," Zara said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with the careful economy of someone who had done a lot of difficult interviews. "Walk me through what you saw." She did. She described the man at the east window, the untouched drink, the angle of his chair. She described the reflection in the front glass and the red dot, where she first saw it, how it moved, where it settled. She told him the approximate time the man left the table, which corridor he used, and why she had moved without speaking first. Shaw listened without interrupting. He had a small notepad, but he didn't write anything down. He was watching her. "You said approximately 4 minutes," he said when she finished. 3 to 4. I checked the clock at the service station at 8:42 when he first sat down. He left around 9:18. "You tracked him." "I noticed him," she said. "That's different." Shaw was quiet for a moment. "How did you know what the red dot was?" "I grew up around someone who knew things like that, and I paid attention." She met his eyes. "I'm a waitress. I pay attention to things. That's the job." He studied her. "That's more than the job." She didn't answer that. Shaw stood, moved toward the door, then stopped. The bullet hit the back wall, he said. Exact location where he'd been seated. Forensics confirmed the trajectory. I know, she said. He looked at her steadily for a moment, then left. She was alone for another few minutes. Then the door opened again, and Grant Calloway walked in. He looked at her the way he hadn't looked at her when she was refilling his water. He looked at her like she was something he needed to understand. There was no warmth in it. Not exactly, but there was weight. Real attention, which was something different from being looked through. He stood with his arms loose at his sides, the cut on his forearm now bandaged. He was still perfectly composed, but beneath that composure, she could sense the running calculation. He was a man who processed things quickly and didn't let his face tell the story before he'd finished writing it. They tell me you saved my life, he said. I moved you, she said. The bullet missed. The math works out. A very small expression crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Why did you move without warning me first? There wasn't time. The debt was already settled. You identified a sniper's targeting laser in a crowded restaurant in under a second. About 3 seconds, she said. I noticed him before that. Calloway was quiet. His eyes didn't leave her face. Who are you? He said. Not like a question exactly. More like a statement with a space at the end of it. Zara, she said. I'm a server. I've been working here 8 months. That's not what I'm asking. She looked back at him steadily. I know. They didn't let her leave that night. She asked twice. First when Shaw returned with a second security team member, and again when the police arrived and the situation became officially documented. Both times she was told, politely, that she was an important witness and that her cooperation was appreciated. Both times the word cooperation was used in a way that made its actual meaning clear. She called Marcus at 9:47 and told him she'd be late. He heard something in her voice that made him ask if she was okay. She told him she was fine and to lock the deadbolt. He asked why. She told him the same thing she told herself, just habit, and hung up before she had to say anything else. The formal questioning happened in a larger room, one of Meridian's private dining spaces that had been cleared and repurposed. A detective named Okafor ran it. Calm, methodical, the kind of cop who asked the same question 4 different ways to make sure the answers matched. Zara didn't mind that. She answered everything the same way each time, because everything she said was true. The harder part was the undercurrent in the room. There were 3 security personnel present in addition to Detective Okafor, and she could feel the weight of what they hadn't said, yet pressing against the professional courtesy. She was a young woman with no documented background in law enforcement or military service who had identified a trained sniper's position in a busy restaurant and physically intervened with enough precision that the target survived. That didn't fit the category of waitress who got lucky. She knew how this math looked from their side of the table. Shaw was there too, standing near the door with his arms crossed, saying nothing. She noticed he was watching her more than he was watching the detective. Let's go over the timeline one more time, Okafor said, his pen moving slowly across his notepad. I noticed the subject at approximately 8:42, Zara said. East window table. He'd ordered a drink, but wasn't consuming it. His chair was angled outward rather than toward the table, which is unusual for someone dining alone. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching the room with a directionality that didn't match someone waiting for a companion. Directionality, the detective repeated. He was tracking one table, she said. Not scanning. Tracking. Okafor wrote something. And the reflection you mentioned. Front glass. The angle of the candle placement on table 11 created a partial mirror effect against the east window. The laser point showed briefly, less than a second. I moved within 2 to 3 seconds of confirming it. Confirming it how? It reappeared on Mr. Calloway's jacket lapel as I was crossing the floor. Okafor looked up from his notepad. You crossed the room in the time between seeing it on the glass reflection and reaching him. Yes. He studied her. That's a significant distance. I run, she said simply. The detective turned slightly toward Shaw. Something passed between them. Not a word, just a glance, and Zara cataloged it without reacting. Shaw pushed off the wall. Thank you, Ms. Webb. We'll need you to stay available. I'd like to go home, she said. We understand that. His voice was even. We're asking you to stay close for now. We've arranged for. I have a brother at home, she said. He's 17. I'm not leaving him alone overnight. A beat. Shaw nodded once. We'll make arrangements for your brother as well. Just for tonight. She looked at him long enough to make it clear she understood the real sentence underneath that one. That this was not actually optional. And then she agreed. They moved her to a different room while they continued processing the scene. This one had better furniture and a window that faced an interior courtyard. She sat with a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for and tried to think through everything in order. What she kept coming back to was the man with the narrow eyes who had been seated at table 9 with Calloway. She had given his description to the detective, approximate age, build, the suit, the untouched food, and noted that he had been the first on his feet when the glass shattered, hand already reaching. That wasn't a reflex. That was anticipation. She had mentioned this to Okafor. He had written it down without visible reaction. Now she sat and thought about it, and understood that she was not going to be going home in an hour. Possibly not in several hours. The door opened, and Shaw came in alone. He sat down across from her with the same careful economy as before, only this time he didn't look like he was conducting an interview. He looked like he was deciding something. "You're not suspected of involvement," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to say it directly. I appreciate that." She held the coffee cup with both hands. "What was it you actually wanted to say?" He almost smiled. "The surveillance footage confirms everything you described. Angle, timing, the subject at the east window. We recovered the round from the wall, clean shot, professional grade. The shooter's position was in a building across the street, 3rd floor, east-facing office. Currently vacant, leased under a name that doesn't hold up. Planned," she said. "Months minimum," Shaw confirmed. "Whoever set this up knew his schedule, his reservation, his preferred seating position in this restaurant." He paused. "That kind of intelligence doesn't come from the outside." Zara set down her coffee. "Someone inside told them." Shaw looked at her steadily and didn't deny it. She absorbed this. "The man at table 9, the one who was with him. We're looking at everyone," Shaw said, "which is why your presence here complicates things. Because I shouldn't have been able to do what I did. Because you did things our team didn't. 3 trained security personnel in this restaurant tonight. None of them flagged the east window subject. None of them saw the laser." His voice was neutral, but the weight of what he was saying was unmistakable. "You did, and then you moved." Zara held his gaze. "I grew up paying attention to things other people missed. That's not a resume. That's just survival." Shaw was quiet for a moment. "Your uncle," he said. "Raymond Webb, Army. 2 tours, Afghanistan. Discharged 2009. She felt something go still in her chest. "You ran my background. Standard protocol when a civilian is present at an attempted assassination. What else did you find? Your mother passed in 2019. You've been the primary caregiver for your brother since then. You worked 3 jobs simultaneously for approximately 14 months before securing this position. You enrolled in an EMT certification course in 2021 and completed the first semester before withdrawing." He paused. Financial reasons. The accuracy of it was not what bothered her. The delivery was not what bothered her. What bothered her was that she had been a mystery 30 minutes ago, and now she wasn't, and nobody had asked her permission for any of it. "So now you know who I am," she said. "Now I know your file," Shaw said. "That's different. You made that distinction yourself, earlier." She looked at him. Despite herself, she recalibrated him slightly. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing right now. Mr. Calloway wants to speak with you again." Calloway came in with a different quality than before. The calculation was still there. She suspected it was always there, but it had shifted. He sat down across from her this time instead of standing, which meant he'd decided to treat this as a conversation rather than an assessment. He put a phone on the table between them. The screen showed a freeze frame from a security camera. The east window table. The subject she had described, mid-40s, medium build, positioned correctly, visible clearly. This man, Calloway said, was not registered as a guest tonight. His name in the system appears to be a placeholder entry added approximately 6 hours before the reservation. The employee who added it has not been reachable since 9 p.m. Zara looked at the still image. Someone inside the restaurant coordinated with the shooter. "Someone inside my organization," Calloway said, and his voice was level in a way that she recognized as controlled anger rather than calm. The reservation time, the table assignment, the seating position, all of that was relayed. Not just to a shooter. The coordination you're looking at required at least 2 people on the inside and someone managing logistics from the outside. She thought about the narrow-eyed man at his table again. She thought about the way he'd been the first to his feet with his hand moving inside his jacket. She thought about how, since then, she had not heard anyone mention him. "The man at your table," she said. "To your left. Who is he?" A pause. "A business associate." He was already standing when the shot came. Already reaching. Calloway's expression didn't change visibly, but something tightened behind it. "Protective instinct," he said. "Maybe," Zara said. "Or he knew something was going to happen, and he was making sure he was clear of it first." Silence settled between them. "That's a significant accusation," Calloway said. "It's an observation," she said. "What you do with it is your business." He looked at her for a long time. Then, quietly, "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" He didn't answer. He picked up the phone and stood. At the door, he paused without turning around. You'll be moved tonight, with your brother, to a secured property. For your safety. I didn't agree to that. No, he said. But someone sent a message to your registered address at 10:14 this evening. He turned then, and his eyes were flat and certain in the way of someone delivering facts rather than threats. Your home address, which has not been released to anyone in this room. She said nothing. He continued. The message read, you shouldn't have moved. The temperature of the room didn't change. But something inside Zara shifted, the last fragment of the idea that this would be over by morning. She felt it go, cleanly, the way a door closes. Okay, she said. Calloway nodded once. Shaw will handle logistics. He left. Zara sat alone with a cooling coffee and the certain knowledge that whoever had put a red dot on a man's chest and then watched a waitress destroy their plan was not the kind of person who accepted that outcome quietly. She thought about Marcus, his textbooks, his exam, the way he still slept with his door cracked the same way he had when they were kids, and the neighborhood outside their window made sounds that kept you awake. She thought about what it meant that someone already had her address. She thought about her uncle, sitting in the dark with the television on, watching men move through desert footage, saying the ones who survive are the ones who decide to survive before the moment arrives. She had always thought that was about being brave. She was beginning to understand it was about something else entirely, about the moment you stop pretending you can walk away and start deciding what you're going to do instead. She stood up, straightened her apron out of habit, and went to find Shaw. She was not walking away, but she was going to need her brother somewhere safe first. And then, whatever this was, she was going to be ready for it. The safe house was a townhouse in a quiet part of the city where the streets were clean and the neighbors minded their business. It had a security panel by the front door, cameras on all four corners of the exterior, and a team of 2 posted outside in a gray sedan that was trying very hard to look like it wasn't there. Marcus had not said a word since they arrived. He sat on the couch in the main room with his chemistry textbook open on his lap, but he hadn't turned a page in 40 minutes. Zara watched him from the kitchen doorway, while she drank water she didn't particularly want. He was 17 and smart and good, and he had learned early, the same way she had, that when Zara got quiet, something was wrong, and the right thing to do was wait. She hated that he had learned that. She had tried so hard to make sure he didn't have to. We'll be home in a day or two, she said. He looked up. You don't know that. She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. He nodded slowly and looked back at the textbook. Shaw arrived at 7 the next morning with coffee and a man she hadn't met yet. The man's name was Douglas, and he was quieter than Shaw, with a stillness about him that reminded her of her uncle in the years after he came back. The kind of stillness that wasn't peace, but rather the absence of wasted movement. We have a development, Shaw said. The development was a name, Victor Hale. Victor Hale was a member of Calloway's restaurant staff, a floor manager who had worked at Meridian for 3 years. Unremarkable record, no flags as background. He had added the fake reservation entry the evening of the attack. His apartment was empty. His phone had been turned off at 9:22 for minutes after the shot was fired. He's in the wind, Shaw said. But he left something behind. Douglas opened a laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen was a photograph, taken from Hale's apartment, of a printed page with a partial floor plan. Meridian's floor plan. Table positions marked. One circled in red. Table 9. He wasn't improvising, Zara said. No, Shaw said. This was prepared in advance, which means someone gave him the plan, the timeline, and the specific target position. It was a hand, not a brain. Zara looked at the floor plan. Who assigned me to table 9 that night? Shaw glanced at Douglas, then back at her. Dale Morrow, your floor manager. Dale assigns sections every shift. That's standard. He wouldn't have, she stopped, thought about it differently, unless someone requested that table be served by someone inexperienced, or someone who wouldn't notice things. That's exactly what we think, Shaw said. You were assigned table 9 because you were considered low risk. An observer, not a threat. She absorbed that. The irony of it had a particular shape. She had been chosen precisely because someone believed she wouldn't pay attention, and that assumption had collapsed the entire plan. What about the man who was sitting with Calloway? She asked. The one at the left. Narrow eyes didn't meet. Shaw's expression shifted slightly. His name is Preston Cole. He's a private security consultant who has worked with Calloway's team on 3 previous occasions. Where is he now? Cooperating fully with the investigation, Shaw said, in a tone that told her the sentence was accurate but incomplete. She filed that away and looked at Douglas. You said there's a development. Hale is the development. Hale is the starting point, Douglas said. It was the first thing he'd said since sitting down. The real development is what we found when we pulled his financial records. He turned the laptop back toward himself, typed briefly, and spun around again. A bank transfer. 3 transactions, 2 months apart, each routed through a shell company registered in Delaware. The total amount was not enormous, $20,000, which was in its own way telling. A full partner in an assassination plot got paid more than $20,000. $20,000 was coordinator money, the kind of money that said you're useful but replaceable. Someone above Hale, Zara said. Several levels above, Douglas said. The shell company traces back through 2 holding entities before it disappears. But we have a direction. Shaw turned to her. Calloway wants to bring you into the working group. She looked at him. I'm a waitress. You're the only person in that restaurant last night who saw what was happening, Shaw said. And you're the only person, so far, who has made connections our team missed. He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a fact, which she respected more. Calloway's offer is simple. Protection for you and your brother, full transparency on the investigation, and your eyes on what we find. You're not field personnel. You observe, and you tell us what you notice. What does he get out of it, she asked. Shaw almost smiled. Exactly what you just demonstrated. Someone who notices things. She thought about the message that had arrived at her apartment. You shouldn't have moved. She thought about the fact that someone had gotten her address in under 2 hours. She thought about Marcus and the textbook and the locked door at home that was no longer enough. She nodded. Okay, but I want someone with Marcus at all times. Not parked outside. Inside in the building. Agreed, Shaw said without hesitation. Calloway arrived mid-morning, and the quality of the room changed when he did. Not because he demanded it, but because he carried a particular gravitational field that Zara was beginning to recognize as the product of decades of being the most consequential person in any given space. He looked like he'd slept, which was more than she could say for herself. The bandage on his forearm was a fresh one. He spread 3 files across the dining table. I've made enemies the way most people in my position do, he said. Deliberately, strategically, and occasionally by accident. He said it without apology, which she appreciated. The list of people who have motivation to want me removed is not short. But this, he tapped the files, is not the work of a disgruntled former employee or a rival who lost a contract. This is coordinated. It required access to my schedule, my security rotations, my preferred restaurants. Information that doesn't exist outside a very small circle. How small? Zara asked. 12 people, Shaw said from the corner. Maximum. She looked at the files. Personnel records, she realized. Senior staff, executives, security leads, a personal assistant. She didn't reach for them. She just looked at the faces on the top pages. Walk me through each of them. Calloway looked at her for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat down. They worked through the morning. By noon, they had narrowed from 12 to 4 based on access levels. Who could have known the restaurant reservation? Who had visibility on the security rotation that night? Who had the operational reach to coordinate an outside contractor for the shooting? Zara listened more than she spoke, but twice she stopped the conversation. The first time was when Douglas was describing the security rotation and mentioned that the 3 in-house personnel assigned to Meridian that night had been finalized only 4 hours before dinner. That's a short window for an outside shooter to adjust their position, she said. Unless whoever coordinated this was close enough to the rotation schedule to get that update in real time. Shaw put down his pen. Real-time access means they were either physically present at the briefing or receiving a feed from someone who was. Which reduces your 12 to people at that briefing, she said. That created a silence in the room that lasted a few seconds longer than the others. The second time she stopped the conversation was when a name came up that she'd heard before, not in the context of the investigation, but in something Calloway had said the previous night. Someone helped me build everything. She asked about it directly. Who is Raymond Hurst? A pause. Calloway's expression didn't change, but his hands, which had been loose on the table, shifted slightly. My CFO. And before that, my COO. We've worked together for 19 years. He was at the security briefing 4 hours before dinner. Douglas said quietly, looking at the rotation log. Nobody said anything for a moment. He's been with me longer than anyone, Calloway said. I know, Zara said. That's worth paying attention to. They gave her a room that afternoon, and she slept for 4 hours, deeper than she expected, the way the body sleeps when it has been running on alert long enough and finally gets permission to stop. She dreamed about nothing she could remember. She woke up to Sean knocking on the door and the sound of Ray's voices somewhere below. She came downstairs to find Calloway, standing at the end of the hall with his phone to his ear and a look on his face that she hadn't seen before. Not anger. Something colder than anger. Douglas was at the laptop, and the screens had multiplied. 3 open windows, financial data, moving across all of them. What happened? She asked. Shaw handed her a tablet. On it was a news article published 40 minutes ago with the headline, Assassination Attempt on Callaway Industries CEO. Sources say shooter still at large. She read the first 3 paragraphs. This has details that weren't released. Correct, Shaw said. Details from the active investigation. From inside this building. She looked at him, then at the 2 security personnel standing near the front door. Then at Douglas, who was pulling access logs. How many people know what's in those files? She asked, nodding toward the dining table. 7, Shaw said. Then you have a leak, she said. Not from before, a current one. Someone in this building, right now, is feeding information out. Callaway ended his call and walked back into the room. The story hit 3 financial feeds simultaneously, he said. Callaway Industries stock dropped 6% in 20 minutes. Trading halt was called. He looked around the room, and his gaze was precise and flat. Whoever is doing this isn't just trying to kill me. They're trying to collapse the company. The rest of the afternoon was a controlled unraveling. Douglas isolated the leak to a single device. A secondary phone registered under one of the security team's names that had been used to photograph documents. The team member in question, a man named Trent Adler, was gone. His post was empty. His vehicle was missing from the lot. Shaw's reaction to this was quiet and contained in the way of someone absorbing something genuinely painful. Adler had been on his team for 6 years. Zara watched Callaway process it too. She could see the recalculation happening behind his eyes, the way he was re-examining every conversation, every briefing, every moment where he had assumed a room was safe. She understood that feeling. She had learned it young, and it never entirely stopped hurting, even when it stopped surprising you. Adler's gone, she said, but he wasn't operating alone. He's another hand. Yes, Shaw said tightly, which means whoever is directing this is still close enough to be giving real-time instructions. She looked at Callaway. You said 12 people. 2 of them are now confirmed as connected, Hale and Adler. Your circle just got much smaller. Callaway was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Shaw. Lock the information perimeter. Nothing leaves this building through channels I don't personally authorize. He looked at Zara, and I want to read on everyone in that inner circle. She thought about telling him she wasn't qualified for that. But then she thought about Victor Hale's floor plan and Trent Adler's missing vehicle, and the way a laser had swept across a tablecloth while 3 trained security personnel watched the room and saw nothing. Okay, she said. The plan to catch the orchestrator took 4 days to build and less than 4 hours to fall apart. In that time, Callaway's company stock partially recovered. The trading halt steadied things enough for the public narrative to shift. Attack thwarted, CEO unharmed, investigation ongoing, and Callaway performed the steadiness required of him in 2 brief public statements that Zara watched on a screen in the safe house and found genuinely impressive. He was, whatever else he was, very good at projecting control he may not have entirely felt. In that same 4 days, something shifted between them in the room. It was not dramatic. It was not a conversation or a declared moment. It was more like the gradual change of light in a room. As the day moved, she started noticing things about him that made him more human, and he started talking to her like she was part of the thinking rather than a piece of external evidence. He told her once, during a late evening when the others had stepped out, that he hadn't always been what he was. That the man who had built the first version of Callaway Industries was younger and harder and had made choices he wouldn't make now. He said it carefully, without asking for anything. Not absolution, not sympathy. She thought about her mother working 2 jobs, and what it meant that some of Callaway's early empire had been built through the kinds of corporate maneuvers that cost people like her family stability. She didn't say that, but she kept it. The plan itself was Shaw's design. They had identified a name, Derek Foss, as a middleman between Adler and the broader operation. Foss was a logistics contractor who had done work for Callaway Industries 3 years ago and maintained peripheral contact with Adler since. A controlled approach, Shaw said. A meeting engineered to look like a negotiation. If Foss was coordinating, he would either confirm details or reveal a contact chain. Zara had a feeling about the plan that she couldn't entirely articulate. She said as much to Shaw the night before. He looked at her. What kind of feeling? The kind where everything fits too neatly, she said. You found Foss in 4 days. After Adler disappeared. That's fast. We're good at what we do. I know, she said. That's not what I mean. I mean, Foss being findable might be the point. Shaw was quiet. You think he was meant to be found? I think it's possible, she said. I think whoever is running this has already lost two hands, and they might be pointing us to a third one on purpose. Shaw didn't dismiss it. He took it to Calloway. Calloway listened, and then said they would proceed with additional precautions, secondary exits, a parallel monitoring team, a signal protocol. He looked at Zara after he said it, and there was something in his eyes that was not quite an apology, but was adjacent to one. Like a man who had spent decades believing the most important room was the one he controlled, starting to suspect that control was thinner than it looked. The meeting with Foss happened in a private office space on the 14th floor of a building that Calloway's company managed but did not occupy. Shaw was present. Two additional security personnel. Calloway via secure audio feed. Foss was a compact man in his mid-40s with an unremarkable face and the manner of someone who had spent a professional lifetime being underestimated. He came in, sat down, looked at Shaw, and said, "I want immunity before I say anything." That was when Zara, monitoring the feed from a room 2 floors up, realized she had been right. Foss had come prepared to talk. That meant he had been sent to talk. She pressed the earpiece. "Shaw, he's too comfortable. This is a delivery." Shaw's voice in her ear. "Copy." Foss spoke for 22 minutes. He described a coordination network with 3 layers, a logistics team, a financial routing system, and a single decision-maker who had authorized both the restaurant attack and the subsequent operations. He gave names, dates, account references. It was detailed. It was coherent. It was almost certainly partly true. When he finished, Shaw said, "Who authorized the Meridian operation?" Foss said a name. The name was Calloway's head of legal, a man named Arthur Banks, who had joined the company 8 years ago and was currently on a business trip in London. The room on the 14th floor went very quiet. Zara looked at the screen and thought about Arthur Banks, his file, his face, the photograph Douglas had shown her 2 days ago. Solid career history. Low profile. No financial irregularities that had surfaced in the first sweep. She also thought about what Shaw had told her about the security briefing 4 hours before the Meridian dinner. Arthur Banks had not been on the attendee list. She pressed the earpiece again. "Shaw, Banks wasn't at the briefing." A pause. "Confirmed. Then he's not the source of the real-time rotation leak." Foss's story has a gap. Another pause, longer. Then, exit protocol. Now, they were in the stairwell when the building's fire suppression system activated on the 12th floor. Not a real fire, a triggered alarm, the kind that moved people and created noise and made it very difficult to coordinate a security response. Shaw had both of them moving before anyone could process what was happening. They came out through the parking structure at street level and into a car that Douglas had already positioned. Foss was not with them. He had been taken a different direction by the secondary team. In the car, Calloway's voice came through on speaker. "Report. Foss was a diversion," Zara said before Shaw could. "Banks is a plausible name. Someone who had access and motive and could be investigated for months without resolution. We were meant to spend time chasing him while the real operation moved." "You're saying Banks is clean?" "I'm saying Foss was handed to us," she said. "The story he told was designed to redirect. Which means whoever gave it to him knew enough about our investigation to know which name would hold up long enough to matter." A long silence. "That level of knowledge," Calloway said slowly, "requires someone with real-time visibility into what we're doing." "Not Adler," Shaw said. "He's been dark since he ran." "Someone else." Zara thought about the 4 days. The files. The inner circle of 12, now reduced. She thought about the one person who had been present at every briefing, every conversation, every strategic discussion. Not as a participant exactly, but as a constant, and whose presence had become so expected that it read as furniture. She said, "Who manages Calloway's internal calendar and access scheduling?" Douglas, from the front seat, said, "Personal assistant." "Name is—" "Don't," Zara said. "Don't say the name yet." She looked out the window. "Does that person have a family member who was involved in any legal dispute with Calloway Industries in the last 5 years?" Silence. Then Douglas typing. Then a longer silence. "Yes," he said. "A brother. Filed a wrongful termination claim in 2021. Settled out of court." The car was quiet. "Pull up their access logs," Zara said quietly. "Every time someone in our group searched a file, sent a message, or opened a briefing document in the last 4 days, match the timestamps against that person's physical location." 3 minutes passed. Then Douglas said, 15 matches. Every major information release correlates with a window where they had access. Shaw said nothing. He was looking straight ahead. Zara understood what this meant, not just operationally, but personally. She had seen the way Shaw's assistant, a young man named Connor Reeves, moved through the safe house over the past 4 days. Efficient, quiet, always slightly peripheral, the kind of presence that a room fills around without noticing. She had noticed him because she noticed everyone. She had not flagged him because the access logs had not been her data to read. He gave Foss the bank's name, she said. He had enough visibility to know banks would be plausible and enough reach to coordinate the delivery. He's not the architect, Shaw said. The words came out carefully, like he was handling something fragile. He's another hand. Yes, Zara agreed. But he's a hand who's still in the building. They took Connor Reeves into a private room at the safe house 40 minutes later. He was 26, slight, with the kind of face that showed his age as younger than it was. He sat down across from Shaw and Zara with his hands flat on the table, and something in his expression that had moved past fear into a kind of exhausted resignation, like a man who had been waiting for the door to open. Zara didn't speak at first. Shaw did, professional, measured, giving Reeves the shape of the situation without filling in all the walls yet. Reeves listened. Then he said, "I didn't know anyone was going to get hurt." "Tell us who you were reporting to," Shaw said. Reeves looked at his hands. He said it was just information, just tracking, that nobody was going to get killed, just pressured. "His name," Shaw said. Reeves looked up. He looked at Zara first, which she found interesting. Not at Shaw, not at the wall. At her, like she was the one he needed to account to. "He told me you would be safe," Reeves said to her. "He told me the target would be removed cleanly and nobody else would be in danger. He didn't tell me there was going to be—" He stopped. "His name," Shaw said again. "He said he was doing it for all of us," Reeves said. "For everyone who worked under Calloway and watched him make decisions that destroyed people's lives. He said he'd been building toward this for years. That it was—" Reeves seemed to run out of whatever had been propelling the words. "He said it was the right thing." The room was very still. "Reeves," Shaw said. "Give me the name." Reeves said, "Harlan Meade." The name dropped into the room like a stone into water, and Zara watched the ripples cross Shaw's face before he controlled them. Harlan Meade, Calloway's longest-serving executive, his former COO and current strategic advisor, who had been with the company for 22 years and who Calloway had mentioned once with the particular weight of someone who had helped him build everything. Shaw's hand went to his earpiece. "Wait," Zara said. He looked at her. "Don't call it in yet," she said. "Think about what happens if we do. Meade is in the building." "A beat. He's at the main briefing right now," Douglas said from the doorway, reading from his phone. "Calloway called a full team meeting 20 minutes ago. Meade is present." Zara looked at Shaw. "If we call it in through a channel Meade has any access to, he's gone. And if he's been running this for—" She turned back to Reeves. "How long?" Reeves said, "He told me he started planning this 3 years ago." 3 years, Zara said to Shaw. "If he's been inside the operation for 3 years, he has exits prepared. Contingencies. The moment he hears his name come across a channel he monitors, it's over, and we never catch him." Shaw held her gaze. She could see him working through it. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we go in there," she said. "Directly. Right now. Calloway only. No channel. Hand to hand." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up. "Stay here," he said. "No," she said, and stood up too. He didn't argue. The briefing room was on the second floor of the safe house, a converted sitting room with a long table and too many chairs. When Zara and Shaw walked in, 6 people looked up. Calloway was at the head of the table. Harlan Meade was to his right. Meade was in his mid-60s, broad and silver-haired, with a face that had been handsome once and was now simply authoritative. He was the kind of man who had spent decades being the second most powerful person in the room and had learned to make that feel like a position of choice rather than limit. He looked at Zara when she entered. She watched his eyes move, a fast, professional assessment, and she saw the moment of recalibration, the moment he understood that the shape of the room had changed. She said, without preamble, "Mr. Calloway, we have something you need to hear, privately and right now." Calloway read her face. He stood. "Everyone out," he said, "except Harlan." She shook her head. "Especially Harlan." The room went absolutely still. Meade's expression didn't break. It adjusted, a small, careful movement like a man shifting weight onto a different foot. "Grant," he said. His voice was warm and steady. "What is this?" Calloway looked at Zara, then at Meade, then back at Zara. She held his gaze and let him read what was in it. Calloway said, "Harlan, don't." The word was quiet. It was not a command. It was something older than that. The voice of someone addressing a person they had trusted completely in a moment they understood completely. Meade looked at Calloway for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was too complex for one name. Then he said, "You made me. And then you forgot what that cost." The other 4 people in the room had not moved. Shaw had his hand at his side. Zara said, It wasn't just about removing you. She was looking at Calloway when she said it. He needed the company. All of it. The collapse, the stock manipulation, the power vacuum. He was positioned to walk into what was left. 22 years of access, and he had already built the structure to absorb the assets. Calloway's jaw tightened. He did not look away from Meade. The assassination attempt was phase 1. She continued quietly. You were just the first piece. A long silence. Shaw stepped forward and said, professionally and without theater, Harlan Meade, I need you to remain in this room. Meade did not run. He sat very still. His face had settled into something she had seen before in different contexts. The look of a man who had finished something, whether or not it had ended the way he intended. He said to Calloway, you always needed someone to tell you what you couldn't see. Calloway said nothing. Meade looked at Zara then, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that was not calculation. It might have been recognition. A waitress, he said. All of this, undone by a waitress. Zara looked back at him. I'm the person who was paying attention, she said. That's all it ever takes. Harlan Meade had been detained for less than 18 hours when the first thing he had built without anyone knowing about it started moving on its own. That was the part Zara hadn't fully accounted for. She understood networks. She had grown up inside one, the kind that wasn't written down anywhere, but held together through obligation and proximity and the quiet understanding that everyone owed someone something. They drove in silence. Douglas was behind the wheel. Shaw sat beside her in the back and looked straight ahead, and she looked out the window at the city moving past. The lights still on in late-night restaurants, a delivery truck idling at a corner, a man walking a dog along a quiet block, and thought about how a city could hold so much ordinary life and so much underneath it at the same time. Her building came into view, and she saw the open door from the street. Not broken. Opened. Someone with a key, or someone good enough not to need one. The security team had already swept the apartment before she got there. Nobody inside. Nothing taken. She confirmed this herself, moving through her own rooms with a methodical calm that she recognized as the same thing she'd felt on the restaurant floor. The focused state where everything narrowed to information. Her books were undisturbed. Marcus's room was untouched. The kitchen was exactly as she had left it, except for the counter. A single sheet of paper placed in the center of the counter beside the dish rack. Printed, not handwritten. For words. You should have stayed invisible. She stood there looking at it for a long moment. Shaw was behind her, not crowding, giving her the space to process. She appreciated that. Different message than before, she said. Yes, Shaw said. Before was a warning. This is something else. It's a correction, she said. They're telling me I still have the option. Stay invisible. Stop being a problem. She set the paper down, which means I'm still a problem. She looked around her kitchen, at the dish rack where she and Marcus had argued last month about whose turn it was to dry, at the magnet on the refrigerator from a field trip Marcus had taken in 9th grade, a fossil museum, a stupid cartoon dinosaur on a yellow background, at the photograph on the wall by the window, her mother, young, laughing at something off camera, her eyes full of the kind of light that didn't survive everything that came after. She had built something small and real in this apartment. Nothing grand. Just the two of them managing the distance between what had happened and what came next. She felt the weight of how much she did not want this to be her life right now. Then she picked up the paper, folded it, and handed it to Shaw. Evidence, she said, and walked back out. In the car, she sat with her hands in her lap and let herself feel it for about 4 minutes. That was a skill too. Not suppression, but containment. Her uncle had called it choosing your timing. You let the feeling come all the way in, you acknowledge it fully, and then you set it aside until you have time to carry it properly. She felt scared. She felt angry in the quiet, settled way that lasted longer than the loud kind. And she felt, underneath both of those things, a certainty that had not been there before the restaurant. The certainty that she was already too far in for invisible to still be an option. After 4 minutes, she said, what do we know about Meade's external network? Shaw glanced at her. We've been pulling it apart since last night. He had 3 outside contractors on retainer. We've identified 2. The third, he paused, is the one we're concerned about. Because the third one is still active. Because the third one has already moved twice since Meade was detained. Whoever they are, they're not waiting for instructions. They have standing orders. She thought about this. A professional with standing orders and no handler to call off the operation. That was a specific kind of dangerous, not the reactive kind, but the mechanical kind. The kind that kept moving because stopping required an instruction that was no longer coming. Where's Marcus? She asked. Same location as this afternoon. 2 personnel with him inside the building. I want a third. Done. She looked out the window. Tell me about the convoy, she said. Shaw, before we get back, tell me what's planned for tomorrow. He told her. She listened, and halfway through she said, change the route. Not the destination, just a route. And stagger the departure time by 40 minutes. He looked at her. If they have standing orders, they have a timeline, she said. The timeline is based on predictable movement. Make the movement unpredictable. Shaw was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. The ambush happened anyway. Not because the route change failed. The route change worked, which was why the ambush hit them 2 miles earlier than it was designed to. The ambush had been planned for a specific choke point that they never reached because Zara had moved the window. What they hit instead was the leading edge of the setup, which was less coordinated and gave them 30 seconds more than they would have had. 30 seconds was enough. She saw the second vehicle before anyone else did. A panel van parked too close to a loading bay, engine running, no visible driver. She said stop, and Douglas had already started a brake, and then the van's doors opened and the shouting started. It was not a clean operation. It was close and loud, and it happened fast. Shaw moved in front of Calloway. Douglas pulled the car right. The security vehicle behind them accelerated into a blocking position. There were 4 men from the van, and they were not amateurs, but they were also not expecting the car to have already stopped and repositioned before they reached it. Zara was out of the car on the sidewalk side before anyone told her to move. Not toward the action, sideways, tracking, keeping the geometry of the situation in her head. She saw the second approach coming from a doorway across the street before the security team did. She shouted once, clearly, and the team member who had been facing the wrong direction turned in time. It was over in under 3 minutes. 2 men detained, 2 fled. Everyone in their group uninjured. Afterward, standing on the pavement while Shaw coordinated the response, Calloway came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at the scene with the expression of a man reassessing something fundamental. You pulled us left, he said. The van was staged for a rightward exit, she said. They expected you to move toward the adjacent street. It's wider. Looks like the faster option. How did you know they expected that? Because it's what I would have expected, she said. So I thought about what came after the expected choice. Then I moved the other way. He was quiet. Then my entire security team has military training, tactical certifications, years of experience. Yes, she said, and you see things they don't. She looked at him. I grew up in a world where being wrong about what was coming didn't give you a debrief and a second chance. It just gave you consequences. She paused. That's not better training. It's just different stakes. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, come inside. Inside the secondary vehicle, with the street secured and the team repositioning, he did something she hadn't expected. He opened his laptop, entered a code, and turned it toward her. Full access, he said. Everything. Financials, personnel, the entire operational picture. Not because you work for me, because you see what I miss, and I don't have time to be proud about it. She looked at the screen, then at him. There's something you need to know, she said, before I look at any of that. He waited. She said, I recognized a symbol on the vest of one of the men from the van. A small mark on the collar, a kind of cross-line pattern. I've seen it before. Not recently. Years ago. He said, where? She said, I'll tell you. But not here. And not until I've had a conversation I should have had a long time ago. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been awake. She didn't apologize for the hour. He wouldn't have wanted her to. He said, you're okay? I'm okay, she said. I need to ask you something. About Mom. A pause. She heard him adjust, the small sound of him sitting up, the particular quality of attention he gave things that mattered. Okay, he said. Do you remember what she called it? The thing that happened with her job. When you were little. He was quiet for a moment. The plant, he said. The factory thing. Walk me through what you remember. Marcus was 9 when her mother lost her job. Zara had been 16, old enough to understand it in real time. Their mother had worked for 8 years at a distribution facility operated by a logistics company called Crestfield Operations, a mid-sized firm that handled warehousing and freight movement, mostly for larger corporate clients. When Crestfield collapsed, suddenly, without public warning, it took 700 jobs with it. No severance, no transition support, pension contributions that had been promised and not paid. Their mother had fought it through 2 different advocacy groups and gotten nowhere because the company's assets had been absorbed by the time any legal process got traction and the principals had restructured elsewhere. She had never fully recovered economically. She had worked 2 jobs until her health made that impossible. She had died in 2019 owing more than she owned. Zara remembered all of this. What she had not known, until 3 days ago when she had started reading Calloway's historical corporate files with new eyes, was what Crestfield Operations had actually been. A subsidiary, One of four. Operated under a holding company called Westbridge Logistics, which had been quietly dissolved in 2015 after a series of restructurings. Westbridge Logistics had been funded in its founding round in 2004 by a venture partnership that included an entity called Callaway Capital Ventures, a now-defunct early-stage investment arm operated by Grant Callaway before Callaway Industries became the primary structure. She had stared at that filing for a long time before she put her phone down. She told him the next morning, not in anger. She had decided on the drive back that she would not do it in anger, because anger would let him respond to the emotion rather than the fact, and the fact was what mattered. She sat across from him at the table in the safe house's main room with Douglas and Shaw present. She had asked them to stay, not for her protection, but because she thought there should be witnesses to the conversation that was about to happen. She laid out what she had found: the filing, the structure, the timeline, the connection between Callaway Capital Ventures and the holding company that had owned Crestfield operations when her mother worked there. Callaway listened without interrupting. His face did not perform anything. It simply absorbed. When she finished, she said, "I need to know what you knew and when." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Callaway Capital Ventures made funding investments in 43 companies between 2001 and 2008. I was not operationally involved in most of them. Westbridge Logistics was one of 4 logistics investments. I knew the sector. I did not run the companies. But you benefited from them." "Yes," he said, without hesitation, which she credited. "I benefited from structures I did not examine closely enough. I was building towards something, and I told myself the details were someone else's responsibility." He paused. "That is not an excuse. I'm telling you what was true." She looked at him steadily. 700 people lost their jobs in a single morning. My mother was one of them. She spent the next decade trying to climb back out of a hole that didn't need to exist. She paused. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm telling you so you understand why I know what a symbol from that world looks like on a man's collar." He held her gaze. "Tell me." She described the mark. A double horizontal line bisected by a diagonal. Simple, like something a person might not notice unless they had been trained to. She had first seen it 11 years ago, when she was 14, and her mother had taken her to a community meeting at a church hall where a group of former Crestfield workers were trying to organize a collective complaint. There had been a man at the back of the room who hadn't participated, had only observed, and had worn that mark on a small badge on his lapel. Her mother had told her to stop staring. She had not forgotten it. "I saw it again twice," she said. "Once in 2018, in a newspaper photograph covering a private security firm's contract announcement. And yesterday, on the man from the van." Shaw was already on his laptop. Name of the firm from the photograph: Hargrove Protective Services, she said. "I looked it up after I saw it. The company was founded in 2012. I couldn't find much public information." Shaw typed, then stopped, then looked up slowly. "Hargrove Protective Services, LLC, dissolved 2020. Operational successor." He turned the laptop. "Registered as a security consulting firm. Current principals include..." He stopped again. She waited. "One of the founding principals," Shaw said carefully, "is listed as a co-investment partner in an early subsidiary of Westbridge Logistics." The room went quiet in a particular way. Douglas said, "So the security firm that provided the ambush team has a direct genealogical connection," Zara finished, "to the corporate structure that my mother worked inside. The same structure that had a funding relationship with Callaway's early investment arm." She looked at Callaway. "This is not coincidence." "No," he said. "Meade knew this," she said. "He's been with you for 22 years. He would have known the full history of the early investments, including the ones that collapsed." Shaw said, "He may have recruited from that world specifically. People with grievances that could be redirected. Or people who were already organized," Zara said. "People who never stopped being angry and just needed someone to point them." She paused, "Which means the outside network isn't random contractors. It's people who believe they have a reason." This changed the shape of the problem significantly. Callaway leaned back in his chair. He looked older than he had at Meridian. Not broken, nothing like that, but heavier, like a man who had been carrying a weight he'd defined as ordinary and was only now seeing its actual dimensions. "What does this mean for stopping it?" he asked. "It means the network doesn't collapse when Meade goes down," she said. "These people aren't working for a paycheck. They're working because they were given a story, a reason. You take away the leader, the story doesn't go away." She looked at him steadily. "Which means the only way to end it is to take away the reason." The server facility was a low building in an industrial corridor 20 miles from the city center. Unmarked, as these places often were. Shaw had acquired the location through the financial trail that Douglas had been building for 4 days. The shell companies, the routing structures, the LLC connections that went through 3 states before they landed on a leaseholder name that meant something. The data inside that facility, according to what Reeves had described before he stopped talking without a lawyer present, contained 2 years of financial manipulation records, the architecture of the plan to crash Callaway Industries from the inside, stock positions, coordination memos, timing schedules, proof that could do what Meade's detention alone could not, expose the full network, not just the leader. Getting in required a period of 12 minutes when the facility's security monitoring cycled through a maintenance window. Douglas had found the window. Shaw had built the plan. Zara had looked at the plan for 10 minutes and suggested 3 adjustments, 2 of which Shaw accepted immediately and one of which he argued about for 2 minutes before accepting also. They went in at 4 in the morning. Zara was not field personnel. That had been the agreement from the start, and she had not asked to change it. She stayed in the vehicle with Douglas while Shaw and 2 others moved through the facility's maintenance entrance. She watched the feed on Douglas's screen and tracked the positions and said nothing unless something changed. Something changed at the 9-minute mark. "There's a second vehicle in the east lot," she said. "It wasn't there when we arrived." Douglas looked. Could be overnight parking. In an unmanned industrial facility with no visible signage at 4 in the morning, she said. "When was the last maintenance window before ours?" Douglas checked. 48 hours ago. "So someone else knew about the window," she said. She pressed the earpiece. "Shaw, east lot. You may have company coming in behind you." A pause. Then, "Copy. We're 30 seconds from the archive." "Go faster," she said. They retrieved the drive with 40 seconds to spare before the second team. 2 people, professional movement, reached the server room. Shaw's team was already back in the maintenance corridor, moving toward the exit. They heard the second team enter the room behind them. They did not wait to find out what that team had come to do. In the car, with the drive secured and the facility 2 miles behind them, Zara exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Douglas looked at her. The second team. They weren't there to retrieve data. "No," she said. "They were there to destroy it." "Yes," she said. "Someone told them we were coming." She looked at the drive and Shaw's hand in the seat ahead of her. "Which means someone in our circle still has a line out." Shaw said, quietly, "Reeves is in protective custody. Adler is dark. Meade is detained." "I know," she said. "Then who?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But we have what we came for. And now whoever sent that second team knows we have it." She looked out the window at the dark road and the flat industrial landscape moving past. The timeline just accelerated. Whatever they were planning to do next, they're going to move it up. The drive in Shaw's hand contained the proof they needed. It also, she understood now, made them a most urgent problem on someone's list. She thought about Marcus, about the chemistry exam he had probably already taken, about the photograph. The Hartwell Center was the kind of building that announced money before you reached the front door. Glass and steel and clean lines. The lobby alone wide enough to park 6 cars in. The financial summit had been on Callaway Industries' calendar for 4 months. Investors, analysts, media, the kind of high-profile gathering that generated its own gravitational pull. Canceling it would have sent a signal. Attending it sent a different one. Callaway had decided to attend. Zara had spent 2 days arguing against it and lost, which she had expected. She understood his reasoning even if she didn't agree with it. Callaway Industries stock was still fragile. His board was watching. His investors needed to see him standing upright in a room, unhurried, in command of the narrative. Absence would cost him more than presence, and he was a man who understood costs. So she had stopped arguing and started planning. The planning session happened the night before, around a table that held Shaw, Douglas, 3 senior security personnel, and Zara. She had written the threat assessment herself. 4 pages handwritten because she thought better on paper and walked them through it section by section. 3 threat layers, she told them. The first was perimeter, snipers, external positioning, the kind of approach they had already seen at Meridian. The second was internal, operatives already inside the event, credentialed guests or staff, the approach that required inside coordination. The third was digital, the financial sabotage, the market manipulation that the data drive had documented, which could be triggered remotely and didn't require anyone to be in the building at all. "They'll use all 3, she said, "not because they need all 3 to succeed. Because if we focus on stopping one, the others move." Shaw looked at her across the table. "You're describing a simultaneous 3-front operation." "I'm describing what I would do," she said, "if I had 2 years of preparation, a team of motivated people, and nothing left to lose because my leader just got detained." She looked at the faces around the table. Me being detained didn't stop this. It accelerated it. The window is closing for whoever is running it now, and closing windows make people reckless. Reckless people do too much at once, which is also when they make mistakes, Douglas said. Yes, she said, which is the only reason I think we can be ahead of it. She split the responsibilities clearly. Shaw and the security team handled the perimeter, external positioning, building access, credential verification for every person entering. Douglas managed the digital front. He had a contact at the exchange who could flag unusual trading activity in real time and freeze within a defined threshold. That left the internal layer. That one is mine, she said. Shaw looked at her steadily. You're not field personnel. No, she agreed. I'm a waitress, which means I know exactly how to move through a crowded event without drawing attention. I know where the staff corridors are, how the service flow works, where the blind spots are. She held his gaze. The morning of the summit arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that felt like it was holding something back. Zara dressed in the uniform Shaw had arranged. White shirt, dark trousers, the same server's kit she had worn at Meridian, which she hadn't considered until she put it on and stood in front of the mirror for a moment. Marcus had called the previous evening. He'd passed his chemistry exam. She had sat with that for a few minutes after the call ended. The specific relief of ordinary good news in the middle of everything else. She had written it down in the small notebook she kept, which was a habit she developed in the EMT course before she'd had to leave it. Instructors always said, anchor yourself to something concrete when everything else is moving. She had adapted that in her own way. She wrote down small, true things. Marcus passed his exam. That was true. That was enough for right now. The Hartwell Center's interior was already organized when she arrived 90 minutes before the event opened. The event staff moved through their setup with practiced efficiency. She slotted in beside them the way she had learned to move in every room. Light steps, deliberate purpose, eyes on the work rather than the room. Except she was watching the room. She identified 3 things in the first 20 minutes that Shaw's perimeter team would not have caught. A credentialed catering staff member who had been admitted through the service entrance, but whose badge had a slightly different lamination texture than the genuine ones. She confirmed this against her own badge, which Douglas had pulled from the event vendor. A second-floor balcony access point that the building security map showed as locked but was, in fact, held open by a folded piece of cardboard someone had wedged under the door at the bottom. And a man in a gray suit near the registration desk who had signed in under a guest name, picked up his badge, and then not moved from the same position near the east corridor for 35 minutes. She relayed all 3 to Shaw through the earpiece. The catering staff member was intercepted quietly at the kitchen entrance. The balcony door was secured. The man in the gray suit was flagged for monitoring. The event opened. Guests filed in. The noise level rose. Calloway arrived at the main entrance with 2 security personnel and walked to the front of the room as though nothing in the world was wrong, which was one of the more impressive things she had witnessed during this entire ordeal. The first hour passed without incident, which made her more alert, not less. She was running coffee service on the east side of the main hall. Actual coffee, actual trays, because the cover only worked if she was doing the work when she saw Carter Webb's position shift. He had been stationed near the secondary exit on the north wall. He moved, without radio contact she could detect, to a position closer to the main stage. She watched him for 2 minutes. He didn't look at Calloway. He looked at the room the way she looked at rooms. Mapping, tracking, not landing. She pressed her earpiece. Shaw. Webb just moved from north secondary to stage adjacent. No radio call. A pause. Copy. I see him. Don't pull him yet, she said. Zara. If you pull him now, whoever he's coordinating with changes the play. Let him move. Watch where he looks. Another pause. Longer. Copy. She kept moving. Coffee. Tray. Service smile. Her eyes on everything. Webb looked at the east balcony at 2 minutes and 40 seconds past the hour. A quick look? Less than a second. The kind of look you give something when you're confirming a position rather than observing it. She was already moving toward the east stairwell. The balcony had been resecured after she'd flagged the door, which meant whoever was supposed to be up there had not been in position when the door was fixed, which meant they were either already inside before the fix, or they had another way in. She took the stairs quietly and came out onto the balcony through the interior access door. There was a man crouched at the far railing with a direct sight line to the main stage. He was not holding a weapon. He was holding a phone, a device she recognized because Douglas had described it 2 days ago when he was walking her through the digital sabotage layer. A remote trigger unit, the kind used to execute a pre-staged financial transaction package at a precise moment. This was the digital front, not a bullet, a keystroke that would crash Callaway Industries stock in real time, in front of every investor and media outlet in the room, at the exact moment Calloway was making his public statement. The kind of collapse that couldn't be walked back. The kind that destroyed not just the company but the man's entire reputation, his credibility, his ability to ever rebuild. The financial manipulation the data drive had documented. This was its detonation point. She did not shout. She did not run at him. She walked toward him at a normal pace and said, conversationally, "You're about 3 minutes early." He turned. He was younger than she expected. Mid-20s, sharp-faced, the look of someone who had been very well briefed and was now encountering something that wasn't in the briefing. "The exchange freeze is already active," she said, which was not entirely certain, but was more true than not. Douglas had activated the trading flag that morning, and she was banking on the probability that it had held. Whatever that triggers, it won't execute. The channel's been closed for 40 minutes. He looked at the device, then at her. "The man downstairs who's going to signal you," she continued, "is currently being asked some questions by someone who outranks both of us." She held out her hand. "Give me the device." A long moment. He gave her the device. She was back on the main floor with the device in her jacket pocket when the second thing happened. The man in the gray suit near the registration desk, the one who hadn't moved for 35 minutes, moved. Quickly, toward the stage. His hand was inside his jacket. She was closer to the stage than any of Shaw's team because she had been running coffee service on the east side. She was moving before she had made a conscious decision to move, which was by now a familiar sensation. The body ahead of the thinking, the instinct that had been built across 23 years of paying attention. She intercepted him at the stage steps. Not physically. She didn't touch him. She stepped directly into his path and said, loudly enough for the 2 security personnel flanking the stage to hear, "Sir, this area is staff only. Can I help you find your seat?" He stopped. His eyes went to her, then to the security personnel who were now both looking at him, then to his own hand, which had frozen inside his jacket. He made the calculation that every person in that position makes, the math of how many people were watching and how fast they could move, and he took his hand out of his jacket empty. Shaw was at his side in 4 seconds. On the stage, Calloway continued his statement without pause. His voice was steady. His posture was relaxed. Either he hadn't seen it, or he had and was simply not going to let the room know. She thought it was probably the second one. Backstage, 20 minutes after the event formally closed, Zara sat in a folding chair with a remote trigger device on the table in front of her and a cup of coffee that someone had brought her without being asked. Shaw was on the phone. Douglas was on the laptop confirming that the trading freeze had held. It had, with a margin of 11 seconds to spare. Calloway came in and stood at the edge of the room. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the very first night in the manager's office at Meridian when he had asked who she really was. But the question in his face was different now. It wasn't curiosity. It was something that looked on him the way gratitude looks on a man who is not accustomed to needing it. He said, "You were ahead of it. All of it." "Not all of it," she said. "The balcony access was a gap." "But you caught it." "I caught it," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. The man on the balcony, and the one at the stage. The one at the stage was carrying a secondary device, a backup trigger. The primary was already neutralized. She picked up the remote unit from the table. They built redundancy in, which means Meade's plan was thorough enough that, even without him, the pieces almost executed. "Almost," Calloway said. "Almost," she confirmed. He sat down across from her. Not the posture of a man in command of the room. Just a man sitting across a table from someone who had, by her count, now been the reason he was still alive and solvent on 3 separate occasions. "What do you want?" he said. "Honestly, what do you actually want out of this?" She looked at him. "I want my apartment back," she said. "I want Marcus in a school where his chemistry teacher doesn't give trick questions on exams. I want," she stopped, thought about it more carefully. "I want the network Meade built to be exposed completely, not managed quietly, publicly. Every person who used a real grievance as a justification for putting people in danger. I want them to have to account for it. That requires releasing the data drive contents," he said. "Yes," she said. "That will implicate my early investment history. Publicly." "Yes," she said again. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Okay." The story broke on a Thursday. Not a leak. Not a managed release through a single outlet. Calloway gave the data drive's contents, the 2 years of financial manipulation records, the coordination memos, the full architecture of Meade's network, to 3 separate investigative journalists simultaneously. The arrangement ensured that no single publication could sit on the story, negotiate it, or soften it in exchange for access. It went everywhere at once. The coverage hit before the markets opened. By 10 in the morning, it was the only story anyone was talking about. Zara watched it from Marcus's room at the safe house, sitting on the edge of his bed while he slept in. He had, at her insistence, been sleeping actual hours for the first time in 2 weeks, which she considered a personal achievement on par with anything else she had done in the last month. She had her phone in her hand, and she scrolled through the headlines the way she had once scrolled through the neighborhood group chats her mother used to follow, looking for what was true underneath what was being said. Callaway Industries' CFO network exposed in coordinated financial fraud scheme. True, mostly, though banks had been cleared and the headline was imprecise. Former Callaway executive Harlan Meade charged in assassination conspiracy. True, Meade had been formally charged that morning, which she had known was coming. Unknown woman credited with disrupting Hartwell's summit attack. She set the phone down after that one. Unknown was fine. Unknown was, in its way, exactly right. She had not saved him for credit. She had not stayed in the fight for recognition. She had stayed because walking away had stopped being a real option the moment someone sent a message to her home address, and because somewhere along the way the thing she was protecting had grown larger than one man's life. It had become something closer to the principle that the people who pay attention, who always pay attention, who are built by their lives to pay attention, deserve to be in the room when it counts. Shaw came by at noon. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and put a folder down between them. Meade gave a statement, he said, through his attorney. He describes his motivation as, Shaw glanced at the folder, correcting an imbalance of power that had gone unaddressed for 2 decades. He's not wrong that the imbalance existed, she said. Shaw looked at her. No, he's wrong about the method. Yes, she agreed. He is. She thought about the church hall when she was 14. The former Crestfield workers at the folding tables with their folders and their petitions, and their particular kind of anger. The kind that comes not from heat, but from the slow accumulation of being told that what happened to you doesn't count. She thought about the man at the back of the room with a mark on his lapel, who had been recruiting even then. Not for justice, it turned out, but for something that wore justice's clothes. Grievance was real. What Meade had done with it was not. The network, she said. The outside contractors. The people connected through Hargrove. 17 individuals identified and charged across 4 states. Shaw said. The cooperation from Reeves was useful, and the drive covered the rest. She nodded. The 700, she said. From Crestfield. Shaw opened the folder. Callaway has engaged a firm to reconstruct the pension liabilities from the Westbridge collapse. The legal structure is complicated, but not impossible. He's committed to a settlement process. He slid a document toward her. It was a 1-page summary, dense with legal language, but the number at the bottom was clear. This doesn't fix it, Shaw said, but it addresses it. She looked at the number. She thought about her mother. She thought about 10 years of working 2 jobs and debt that outlasted the person who carried it, and the particular exhaustion of fighting a thing that was too large and too far away to get your hands on. She didn't cry. She had already done that, privately, 2 nights ago in a room they'd given her, in the hour between 2 and 3 in the morning when the adrenaline had finally stopped and she'd had nothing to do but sit with all of it. Now, she just looked at the number and let it be what it was. Not enough. And also something. Okay, she said. She closed the folder. What does he want? What Callaway wanted was delivered in person, that afternoon, in the safe house's main room. He came alone, which she noticed. No Douglas. Just the man himself, sitting across from her with his hands on the table, and the expression of someone who had decided to say something without the buffer of professional language around it. I want to offer you a position, he said. Formally, within Callaway Industries. She waited. Not security, not advisory. An actual role, building something. I've been thinking since the night at Meridian about the places in my organization that went wrong. Not the ones Meade corrupted. The structural ones. The places where nobody was paying attention because paying attention wasn't part of the job description. He paused. I want to build a function that does exactly that. Internal, not compliance, not legal. Something more like what you did at that restaurant, and at the summit, and in every room we've been in together over the last month. Someone whose job is to see what the room is missing. She looked at him for a long moment. You want to institutionalize instinct. I want to put a person with your particular kind of perception somewhere that matters, he said. With actual authority. Not decorative authority. Real authority to stop things before they start. She had thought about this conversation in an abstract way since the night after the summit. She had thought about what she would say, and she had arrived at the same answer from several different directions. No, she said. He absorbed this. Why? Because what you're describing is a job that exists inside your structure. And your structure, which I say with full awareness of everything you've done in the last month, is still the structure that produced the imbalance Meade was reacting to, even if his reaction was wrong. She held his gaze. I don't want to work inside that. I want to build something of my own. He was quiet. What would that look like? I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I know it wouldn't report to anyone who had a financial stake in what I noticed or didn't notice. She paused. I am not saying no to you as a person. I am saying no to the version of this where I trade one kind of invisibility for another. He looked at her for a long time. Then something in his face shifted. Not disappointment, she thought. More like recognition. The look of a man who had just heard something he understood was true even though it didn't resolve in his favor. The settlement process, he said. For the Crestfield workers. I want to set it up independently. A separate entity, not managed through Callaway Industries. That's smarter legally anyway, she said. I know, but I also want you to have oversight of it. Not management, oversight. You and whoever you choose to work with. He paused. Consider an acknowledgement that some things should be watched by someone who isn't me. She thought about this. It was a different kind of offer. Not a job. Not an incorporation into his world. A specific responsibility with a specific independence. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. He stood. At the door he turned, and she expected something final, some summative thing, the kind of line that a man in his position delivers at the end of a significant conversation. Instead, he said, Your brother? Marcus. His school. She waited. There's a STEM program at Callaway Foundation that funds merit-based transfers. No strings. He qualifies if he's interested. He paused. That's not a negotiation. It's information. He can decide. She said, I'll tell him. He left. She sat in the quiet of the room for a while. Through the window, she could see the street. Ordinary afternoon traffic, a woman pushing a stroller, two men arguing pleasantly about something outside a coffee shop. The world going about the business of being itself, indifferent to what had happened in the rooms she'd been sitting in for the past month. She thought about the restaurant, the chandelier, the candlelight on the crystal glasses, the way she had walked into that shift, like she walked into every shift, with her attention fully deployed and her expectations deliberately low, because that was the combination that kept you functional in a world that didn't always notice you were there. She thought about the red dot, the 3 second between seeing it and moving, the pure, uncomplicated decision of a body that had spent its whole life preparing for a moment it couldn't name. She took out the small notebook she carried, turned to a blank page. She wrote, What do I actually want to build? Then she sat with the question. She didn't answer it yet. The question was enough for right now. 6 weeks later, Zara stood outside a rented office space on a mid-level floor of a building in a part of the city that was neither poor nor wealthy, the specific geography of something in the process of becoming. The suite was empty except for a desk she'd bought secondhand, a whiteboard she'd found at an estate sale, and a window that faced east and got good morning light. The name on the door wasn't finished yet. She was still deciding. What she knew was this. She was going to build something that watched the rooms other people assumed were safe. Not for corporations, or not only for corporations. For communities. For people who didn't have security teams and threat assessments. For the Crestfield workers and the church hall organizers and the people who had spent years being told their instincts were wrong. She was going to hire people who had been shaped the way she had been shaped, by necessity, by attention, by the specific education of a life that had never let them stop paying close enough attention. She took a breath, pushed open the door, and went inside. She stood at the window and looked out at the city. She could see the Hartwell Center from here, which she hadn't realized until this moment. The glass and steel structure catching the morning light, ordinary and enormous at the same time. She heard the door open behind her. Marcus's voice, It doesn't have a sign yet. I know, she said. He came to stand beside her at the window. He was carrying 2 coffees from the place downstairs. He handed her one and looked out at the city with the expression of someone who had the entire specific optimism of being 17 and just having passed a chemistry exam. What's it going to be called? He asked. She thought about it. She thought about all the rooms she had stood in over the past month. All the things she had seen that other people hadn't. All the moments where the right answer was simply, and had always simply been, to keep looking. Something honest, she said. Something that says what it actually does. Marcus sipped his coffee. You'll think of it, he said. She looked out at the city, at the Hartwell Center catching light, at the ordinary traffic of an ordinary morning, full of things happening just below the surface that most people weren't looking for. Yeah, she said, I will. If someone spent their whole life being made invisible, would you have noticed them before it was too late, or only after they saved you? If this story made you think, hit like and subscribe. We drop new stories every day.